In my past life I lived like a pathetic ghost chasing her shadow for 13 years only to be discarded. To protect her I took a fatal strike from a business rival in the dark, and her last look at me was completely merciless, as if I were an annoying stranger. But the system rebooted and I woke up back on the exact day it all began. As her father threw a 1 billion yuan check directly at my face demanding I leave his daughter forever. And while in my past life I rejected this check with blind pride and left like a beaten dog, this time my soul was already frozen. So I picked it up, showing no anger and no tears but only absolute liberating calculation, causing the proud Ice Queen Sujin to freeze for the first time in her life as her flawless composure shattered into pieces. And looking directly into the father's eyes, I folded the check neatly and thanked him with a polite voice that cut through the luxury hall like a thunderclap, leaving him completely choked because he expected me to beg or fight for my dignity and never imagined I would accept the price so gladly, prompting her toxic suitor Sawi to laugh out loud and attempt to humiliate me before the entire elite circle, as he shouted, calling me a shameless dog who sold 13 years of pure feelings for 1 billion, which in the past would make me lose control, but now those words were just data. So I turned to face him with no rage in my eyes but only the cold evaluation of a predator looking at a dead target, enumerating the facts by stating that first, it wasn't feelings but unilateral humiliation, and second, 1 billion yuan for 3 years of loyal service is just the right price. Before I exited their system forever, leaving them in a dead sepulchral silence as I walked out into the blinding afternoon sun, knowing I lived in darkness once, but this time I will never love a human being again and will only love capital. I returned to my pathetic rental room near Sujin's university, where the smell of instant noodles and poverty was everywhere, and sat down to open the market terminal because my greatest weapon wasn't money but 10 years of perfect economic memory. Remembering that tomorrow morning this obscure bankrupt tech company will announce a revolutionary chip patent skyrocketing their stock from 5 to 200 yuan. But before the execution I needed to clear the last physical links to the past by dialing Sujin's personal line one last time, coldly telling her that all her discarded things are outside my door and she should send someone to pick them up because I am destroying this number before hanging up, making the world perfectly silent, physically terminating 13 years of obsession in 1 second by breaking the connection. So the next morning I went straight to the clearing house to execute the transfer, knowing the old fox Su Xianghua didn't dare cancel the check out of fear of a public scandal allowing the full capital to hit my account. And without a single second of hesitation I moved the entire amount, going all in on the chip patent anomaly. Meaning the trap was set as I left the old slums behind and headed directly toward the luxury core of the city center, never returning to that pathetic rental room, where I rented the most expensive service apartment in the city center, establishing pure luxury and total autonomy. And as I sank into a massive marble bathtub I remembered how in my past life I stood outside in the rain watching the lights of these hotels, wondering which romantic party Sujin was attending. Suddenly my terminal buzzed, showing it took her a whole week to track down my new encrypted line, with Sujin sounding annoyed as she asked why I threw away all her gifts, which were really just her junk and leftovers that I used to treat like a holy treasure. But a Sigma doesn't waste breath on recycled entities, so I blocked her line instantly without a single word. And for the next 7 days I lived the life I always deserved, experiencing natural awakening and complete physical optimization. Knowing clothing makes the man, I burned the old cheap fabrics and put on the armor of the financial elite. Because when you enter a luxury venue wearing a multi-million watch you only receive submissive smiles instead of suspicious stares. So I sat at the central VIP table, completely dominating the room layout while surrounded by elite models. Realizing that in my past life I didn't even have the legal right to cross their security line, while now I owned the atmosphere. But the anomaly reappeared as Sujin entered the club with her arrogant circle looking completely out of place in her cold aura. And when our eyes met her look was filled with pure disgust, since to her I was just a loser using her father's money to show off, prompting Sawi to push through the crowd with a malicious sneer aiming to trigger a public scene, as he mocked me loudly, asking if I took Uncle Su's money to play king, while the heirs erupted in laughter, calling me a pathetic dog. Yet I slowly swirled my premium whiskey and completely ignored their presence because the lion does not react to the barking of stray dogs. Then I took a slow sip and levelly asked young Master Sawi how his family business was doing in the Southeast Asian port project, causing his arrogant grin to freeze instantly as cold sweat formed on his forehead, since the cancellation of their port project was a top-secret board matter. And I calmly continued laying out their hidden defaults, utilizing financial data from my past life memory by asking about Sanji Capital stealing their chip agency rights in Europe, making the entire circle go dead silent as the power dynamic shifted completely in just 3 sentences. And standing up slowly to dominate his personal space I whispered for him to fix his own bankruptcy first and stop acting like a rabid dog, before leaving a premium tip on the table and adjusting my tailored suit to walk straight past the frozen young master, stopping for a split second right next to Sujin, who couldn't comprehend how a poor submissive boy turned into a sharp financial predator in 1 week, giving her a polite hollow smile and advising her to develop a better judgment of character because I no longer care to look up to her. As I walked out of the luxury club heading toward a waiting premium sedan, knowing my capital has matured and it is time to move to the global stage. The plane takes off at dawn, securing the first phase of the loop because money can be recovered but time and loyalty are gone forever. Shanghai is a modern battlefield where old status means nothing and clean capital dictates the laws of survival. I didn't rush to acquire permanent property and instead leased an elite autonomous suite overlooking the financial delta. Because from this height the city looked like a massive ledger and I held the master key to its hidden anomalies. The next morning the market opened with a tectonic shift as my prediction materialized with surgical precision. And my broker called with a voice shaking with absolute adrenaline because the textbook anomaly had just triggered. Asking if we should liquidate now as weak players secure small profits early because they are driven by fear while a Sigma dictates his own targets. So I ordered him not to touch the position and to hold the allocation until the asset price strikes exactly 150. And while the market panicked I spent the week drafting a multi-layered business matrix for my future empire. Knowing quick money from stock anomalies is just a tool and true dominance requires a bulletproof corporate foundation. Exactly 30 days later the asset value reached my calculated peak and the extraction phase was complete. Growing my initial seed capital from a simple check into a solid 300 million yuan war chest. So I instantly deployed the capital and established Dynasty Capital on the highest executive floor of the financial core. And started headhunting the most ruthless elite financial analysts and risk managers from Western Tier 1 banks. At first these corporate elites looked at my 20-year-old profile with hidden arrogance and deep suspicion. Believing a young newcomer was just playing with lucky capital and was bound to default on the first market correction. But I didn't waste time on motivational speeches because a sovereign proves his supremacy through raw mathematical results. And I laid out a high-leverage short-selling directive targeting a specific overvalued Western index anomaly. Proving my calculation right as within 48 hours a global correction triggered 3 times in a row exactly as predicted. Extracting $50 million in a single trading session and leaving the corporate elites completely paralyzed in pure shock. And in that single hour their suspicion transformed into absolute submissive adoration as they realized I was no longer just a boss. I became their financial deity ensuring the architecture of Dynasty Capital was fully synchronized and loyal. A week later a premium anomaly from the past cut through my schedule as an invitation to the Global Business Summit arrived. Listing the Su family as a primary host proving the old regime was trying to project its presence like a persistent ghost. And my secretary suggested declining knowing the scale of the summit and the potential friction. But I ordered her not to decline and to prepare my logistics as it was time to see what faces the old elite will make when the system updates and I had already prepared a massive financial gift for their arrival. On the day of the summit the entire regional elite gathered under the gold-plated chandeliers of the central pavilion. And I walked inside with perfect calm authority but the old anomalies were already waiting to cause a scene. As Sawi cornered me immediately looking like a desperate gambler who had just lost his final allocation. Roaring to ask what I did to their offshore projects and demanding to know where a broke loser got this capital. Showing that to him I was still the poor boy from the slums as he didn't understand his entire family business was already on life support. So I caught his wrist calmly but forcefully and whispered that this suit is highly restricted capital and he cannot afford to replace it anymore. Causing him to fall back pathetically clutching his bruised wrist while I smoothly straightened my collar enjoying the flawless feeling of total absolute control. Then Sujin appeared from the shadows with her beautiful face frozen in absolute bewilderment as she stared at my new persona. Asking with a trembling voice if I really had to be this ruthless to our families while I looked at the face I had pathetically protected for 13 years with a heart remaining completely flat. And I replied looking directly into her pupils without emotion that business is war and when her circle suppressed me for years she never found them ruthless. Leaving her completely crushed by my clinical detachment as I ignored her silence and walked straight past their group. Joining the true architects of the market as the Sawi family was no longer even registered as a valid rival in my system. The next day the execution phase accelerated as I initiated a hostile silent buyout of the remaining public shares of the Su corporate group. Deploying secret data audit reports from my past life to expose every hidden financial fraud of her father. And within 48 hours the proud Ice Queen was forced to wait outside my office door like a desperate petitioner. So I let her wait for 2 hours in the lobby allowing her father to realize the exact cost of the check he threw at my face. Before she finally entered my domain broken and exhausted holding their last desperate corporate restructuring proposal. Begging me to stop the acquisition and promising to accept any conditions while I remembered dying in a dark alley to protect her and her not even attending my funeral making the cosmic irony perfect. So I walked over and calmly dropped her proposal into a document shredder stating that when you beg a sovereign you don't offer deals but total surrender. Demanding 51% controlling shares of the Su group and a public apology from her father on all news networks. Causing her to collapse and claim her father would never accept while I simply smiled knowing they wouldn't have a choice before the market closes tomorrow. The second phase of the loop was closing and old elite empires were collapsing into the digital furnace of my architecture. As I gave her one final directive to leave my office and not disrupt my process of generating capital. Proving the last trace of human pity inside my core was officially purged as the game operated with absolute mathematical perfection. Because their countdown struck 0 and the Su group belongs to my network now as money can be recovered but time and loyalty are gone forever. Consolidating the regional sector was just the foundation because to build a true global monopoly you must align with the apex predators. And my new multi-billion energy partnership with the Lee Syndicate was finalized in 10 minutes completely excluding the old elite. But as the tycoon left a broken anomaly reappeared when Sujin stood at the door with her cold Ice Queen mask entirely gone and her proud posture completely shattered. asking with a cracking voice if we could please just talk, not about business but just talk. Yet while in my past life a single soft word from her would make my heart explode with emotion, now it was just background noise. So I checked my watch and levelly told her she had exactly 3 minutes because my international conference begins shortly. Causing her eyes to fill with tears of pure humiliation as she frantically lied that her father only threw that 1 billion check to test me and never wanted me to actually leave. And I let out a genuinely amused laugh because calling it a test after throwing $1 billion at my face and letting guards kick me out onto the wet asphalt shows the true comedy of the old regime's arrogance. Then I stood up and whispered for her to thank her father for that check because it made me realize my absolute dignity is worth far more than her cheap romance. Walking out into the bright afternoon sun and leaving her behind in the dust of her own lies as the old ties were severed forever. The next morning back in the financial capital, the old patriarch Su Xianghua finally realized his empire was bleeding out. And he personally called my encrypted line with his voice stripped of all its former billionaire authority. Roaring to ask what I was doing and screaming in panic that I stole their projects and was maliciously buying up their hidden shares on the open market. But I remained completely unbothered and reminded him that he taught me this rule himself, that in the concrete jungle of business only permanent interests exist and no emotions. Then I terminated the link and instantly moved his contact into a black encrypted ban list because I don't negotiate with collapsing structures while my algorithm was already executing the final blow. By releasing the secret accounting fraud books of the Su Group containing data I meticulously collected during 13 years of my past life slavery onto major international financial news portals. And within 1 hour their false reputation was utterly annihilated as their market value crashed to the absolute bottom limit. The final margin call arrived with a massive violent rainstorm over the financial center as I walked out holding a sleek black umbrella. Finding her waiting for me in the downpour without an umbrella as her proud ice queen spine was completely bent by the cold reality. Wailing through the rain and begging me to stop because her father had a severe heart attack and was in the ICU, wanting to apologize to me in person. And as I stared at her ruined face through the curtain of gray rain, a sudden sharp flashback cut through my mind. Remembering how in my past life on a freezing night just like this I ran across half the city to buy her a specific cake she casually mentioned. Only for her to take one look at it and coldly tell me it was too sweet and to throw it away before shutting the door in my face with absolute disgust. So back in reality I stood perfectly still and told her with freezing frost that if apologies could fix broken systems the police wouldn't exist, and ordered her to go home. Prompting her to drop to her knees on the wet asphalt screaming in agony and asking why I am so heartless now when I used to lose my mind if she just caught a simple cold. And I answered with absolute majestic finality that the Chainan who lost his mind for her died a long time ago in a pitch-black alley, and now in my eyes only metrics exist. Then I walked past her toward my premium sedan while she tried to chase the vehicle, screaming her final most desperate proposition. Crying out that if I saved her family she would do anything and even marry me, truly believing her hand in marriage was still a prize for a sigma. So I rolled down the tinted window for a fraction of a second and told her that her current market value isn't even sufficient to qualify her as a front desk receptionist at Dynasty Capital. Before closing the window and blocking out her tears and her rain and her late romance, as this round was won with 100% dominance. Friday morning brought the emergency general meeting of shareholders, which was the final execution of the hostile takeover. And when I entered the hall the room went dead silent instantly as all eyes turned toward my tailored silhouette, allowing me to calmly occupy the central seat of power that had belonged to the Su family for decades because now it was my domain. And the old board members rushed to hand over their documents to please the new sovereign as the ledger confirmed 51% controlling shares transferred to me. Until the useless direct heirs tried to stage a final scene as the arrogant young relative Suyu breached the door screaming with a face red with rage. Roaring to ask by what legal right I was kicking them out and claiming it was their family property because parasites never understand that the market respects raw power and not blood. Yet I didn't even look at him and simply made a slight casual gesture to my security detail commanding them to get him out of my sight and giving all direct relatives of the old regime exactly 60 minutes to clear their desks. And his curses echoed through the corridor as he was dragged across the marble floor like a child locking out the last remnants of their fake authority. Officially purging the old name as the structure was reorganized into sovereign technology acting as a core node of my network. Then I looked at the broken ice queen sitting quietly in the back row completely hollowed out and decided to completely sever any lingering karmic debts by leaving them a small insignificant asset. Coldly stating I will leave her family a single retirement house in the old town so they won't live on the streets, which was not an act of kindness but a clinical termination of our past that officially reduced her pride to ash. Causing her to stand up with eyes completely vacant and dead like a soulless marionette and exit without a word as her reign was finished and my global map finally took physical shape. The regional cleanup was complete, but a true sovereign knows that a new variable always enters the matrix when you rise too fast. As my tycoon partner Mr. Lee warned me that the southern tech sector was dominated by a far more dangerous predator. Introducing me to Sun Roxy, who was known as the red-haired witch and the absolute dominator of artificial intelligence for the next 10 years. And she saw my rise as a direct threat to her southern monopoly, lifting her wine glass with a provocative smirk that carried a sharp public challenge to my architecture. But while in my past life I was just a low-tier driver when she ruled the tech markets, in this life I know her every hidden default, so I nodded back with a calm, polite but completely predatory smile. and turned my back to walk towards the private exit knowing weak rivals cause boredom and a formidable opponent is just a massive opportunity to absorb an entire continent's infrastructure. So the first global nodes of my artificial intelligence matrix went online as the butterfly effect of my rebirth accelerated. Let the red-haired witch prepare her auction because the architect is ready to update the entire market and money can be recovered but time and loyalty are gone forever. The confrontation with the Southern Tech Cartel didn't happen in a boardroom but began over a cup of boiling tea. And Roxy did not wear her corporate suit displaying traditional elegance while the predatory hunger in her gaze remained lethal, bringing the weight of the entire Southern financial circle to my table to demand my immediate withdrawal from the chip patent auction. And sharply told me to name my price to back down because the Sen family is determined to own this infrastructure. So I set the teapot down and replied that she investigated my past and thinks I am still the poor boy who would trade his destiny for a check. But added with a perfectly level and cold voice that she miscalculated my appetite because I don't lack capital and certainly do not fear the Southern Cartel, causing the atmosphere to drop to an absolute freezing point as she realized her psychological warfare had hit a solid stone wall. And throwing back a challenge to see if my confidence survives the auction next week before exiting while I smiled knowing her countdown had already begun. But before updating the tech market I needed to close the final domestic ledger with the old patriarch. Seeing that in just 2 weeks the man who threw $1-billion-yuan check at my face had aged 20 years as his empire was gone. While Sujin sat by his side like a broken shadow with her proud posture gone and her ice queen aura reduced to desperate silence. And as he looked at me his breathing became ragged because the realization that his family's destiny was in my hands was a terminal torment. Admitting defeat through his oxygen mask by saying the Su group is completely liquidated and asking what else I want from a dying man because the elite always begs for mercy only when their final defenses are completely obliterated. So I calmly demanded the official title deeds to the old factory lands in the southern district which was the last asset in their possession. Causing her to freeze because that old abandoned factory land was their last family secret and they didn't know a massive central metro line was planned underneath. Realizing that in my past life they sold that land to Saui for scraps because they couldn't see its future valuation but in this life the jugular piece of meat belongs to me. And placing a platinum transfer agreement on the table I offered to cover all their remaining medical liabilities and arrange a legal discipline position for his daughter in exchange. And he signed over their last shred of family dignity officially terminating and closing the past karma with the Su family. As I picked up the deeds and walked out leaving behind a command for Assistant Su to report to the Human Resources Department of Dynasty Capital tomorrow morning as her final chance. On Monday morning the old Ice Queen reported for duty as her expensive dresses were replaced by the uniform of a submissive corporate assistant. And though her eyes still held a tiny remnant of her past pride reality had forced her to bow her head before the new sovereign. While I didn't even look at her face because to a Sigma an assistant is just a mechanical node in the system executing orders without question. Directing her to make 10 copies of a high-leverage bidding file and follow me to the auction hall at 3 o'clock to meet Roxy. And when she hesitated and trembled asking about the cartel's influence I cut her off with freezing focus stating that her function is execution not strategic analysis and told her to do her job or resign. Making her bite her lip and bow her head deeply as she cleared her tears and synchronized with my pace ensuring the process operated under absolute flawless discipline. That afternoon arrived marking the day of the chip patent auction which was the final battleground for the control of the Southern artificial intelligence infrastructure. Where Roxy occupied the dominant left wing allied with 3 multi-billion magnates to build an unbreachable capital wall against my fun. While I sat on the right wing completely relaxed with 0 advisors and only my assistant holding a single translucent data tablet. And as the presenter initiated the bidding the Southern Cartel immediately accelerated the price by throwing aggressive margins to intimidate the floor. Raising the bid to an astronomical level and looking directly at me with a provocative testing smirk as the determination of a supreme tycoon filled her face. Calling out across the room to suggest I do not follow that price because I cannot match the corporate weight of the Sen family today. But I replied with a completely level detached and chillingly precise tone that I will not follow her price but highly suggested she answer the urgent call from her personal secretary right now. Causing her head secretary to frantically run down the aisle pale with panic and whispering into Roxy's ear which made the entire color drain from Roxy's face turning her skin into frozen white stone. Because exactly 10 minutes prior her secret multi-billion merger in Europe was cancelled by international regulators for massive compliance violations. Triggering her absolute crisis as the capital wall she built to crush me turned into an empty illusion within 60 seconds and her entire liquid capital chain broke in real time. And with the Southern Cartel completely paralyzed and unable to produce liquidity I executed my precise counterstrike offering a price slightly below her original high margin. Resulting in the legendary red-haired witch being defeated in less than an hour as the presenter slammed the final gavel and pointed directly toward my desk announcing it was sold to Dynasty Capital. While Assistant Su watched the battle in dead silence witnessing for the first time how real predatory financial wars are won by pure calculation. After the auction she was waiting for me near my car looking like a defeated soldier holding a dead cigar. So I calmly took the unlit cigar from her fingers and tossed it into a trash bin as she whispered looking up to ask who exactly I am since a 20-year-old boy cannot possess such surgical foresight. And dominating her personal space I stated that who I am doesn't matter but what matters is her family needs 500 million yuan immediately to cover the structural hole in Europe. exposing her most hidden corporate secret and offering to invest those 500 million into her company right now to save her survival in exchange for total control of all her AI research labs. And being an intelligent predator, she understood that between empty pride and absolute survival, a sovereign always chooses metrics. Proposing a deal where I will only receive dividends from their decision-making core, meaning the Southern Tech Cartel was officially absorbed into my layout and my framework was expanding at an exponential trajectory. An assistant Sue watched the entire transaction from the front seat, having her old beliefs about her family's untouchable status completely shattered. That evening the financial capital was beautiful as we sat at an exclusive terrace organizing the new laboratory data streams. While she was becoming a highly qualified assistant completely purged of her old heiress arrogance, her heart was still trying to trigger a dead connection. Sobbing quietly to thank me for her father's medical bills and asking if 13 years ago she had been kinder to me, would our metrics be different now, because a deep emotional romance that arrives too late is the most worthless currency in the concrete jungle. So acting as an absolute stone wall of cold indifference against the magnificent neon background, I told her she only regrets her actions because I am currently sitting on the throne of this market, and if I were still a grain of dust she would find me annoying. Telling her to deliver her work protocols by tomorrow morning or deliver her formal resignation because the loop is closed and money can be recovered but time and loyalty are gone forever. Moving to the capital wasn't a choice but the natural progression of my multi-billion infrastructure. Knowing Jingchan is the historical center of power and old money and a place where outsiders are systematically chewed up and spat out. And Sujin had adapted perfectly to her role because the arrogant heiress was gone and replaced by a flawless quiet corporate machine. But my arrival was greeted by a public trap as the supreme electronic monopoly of the capital known as the Yi family staged a demonstration of force. So I walked into their territory alone, wearing no armor but my calculation. Where the direct heir Yifang looked at me with deep historical superiority written into his chiseled face. Mocking loudly to ask if this is the newcomer, causing anomalies in Modu and adding that I don't look special at all, while the elite crowd erupted into condescending laughter expecting me to back down. But a Sigma doesn't perform for the audience, so I ignored the insult and chose my position with clinical indifference. Prompting Yifang to bark and slam his glass on the table while suggesting I go back before losing my last pair of clothes because he wanted to assert historical dominance over my fun. So I calmly pulled a dark silk handkerchief from my pocket to slowly wipe my fingers and locked eyes with him, stating that instead of worrying about my assets he should check his blocked raw materials in the Southeast Asian ports. Causing his eyes to widen in pure horror as the arrogance instantly drained from his features because that port block was a terminal secret hidden even from their own board directors. And I levelly added that if I am not mistaken that shipment is the entire life support of his family business this year, making him stand paralyzed and unable to produce a single syllable as cold sweat broke on his forehead. Then I stood up and adjusted my tailored cuffs before walking out of the club, leaving them in a sepulchral silence as the capital circle realized a predator had entered the grid. Initiating the execution phase immediately by deploying my team to locate the Yi family's internal weak node. Finding their chief data accountant Lao Bu drowning in hidden gambling debts and being hunted by Yifang's enforcers in an underground illegal casino. So I bought his entire debt profile for double the margin by placing a massive stack of high-denomination cash directly onto his trembling knees, because to a dying man loyalty is worth less than a ticket to survival. And in exchange he delivered the real unedited accounting logs of the entire E-Electronics monopoly on a high-tech portable hard drive. The next morning at market open I didn't leak the files to the press but used them to initiate a massive automated short-selling attack on their listed assets. With Senroxy joining the execution pool and aligning her southern capital with my matrix to dismantle the capital giant. And within 3 hours their 3 primary listed companies hit the daily downward limit, causing Yifang to burst through the glass doors of the trading floor looking completely ruined. Where 2 massive security guards instantly tackled him to the polished floor right in front of my shoes while he screamed that the capital circle would never forgive me, but I didn't even look down at his face. Taking a slow sip of hot tea and whispering that the capital circle only follows the strong and for them he no longer possesses any valid extraction value. 1 week later at the grand opening ceremony of Dynasty Capital's majestic new headquarters, the old elites who mocked my outsider status were lining up outside my pavilion smiling falsely. And Sujin managed the social interface flawlessly, having completely merged with my corporate architecture. As the E family monopoly was officially integrated into history and my network now controlled the vital electronic pipelines. Making my next objective total control of the core technology sector as I took over the southern research clusters previously owned by the Sen family. Where the chief scientist Dr. Lin was enraged by my radical restructuring budget cuts and slammed his fist onto my desk claiming I was destroying traditional science. Yelling that I am a simple businessman and throwing all funds into deep neural networks is a dead end because traditional minds are always limited by the horizon of their current era. So I calmly stood up and began rapidly sketching complex futuristic code logic arrays across a massive glass board, laying out the master architecture of deep learning algorithms that wouldn't be discovered by the market for another 13 years. Causing his anger to transform into absolute religious awe as his jaw dropped and his eyes widened into total paralyzing shock, reading the flawless formulas and staring at me as if looking at a cosmic anomaly. And I calmly ordered him to execute this directive and bring the first generation of general artificial intelligence online in 3 months, because I don't argue with experts but simply rewrite the logic of their entire field. The final piece of the tech empire was the priority mining rights for the massive northwestern lithium deposits negotiated at a grand government industrial summit hall, where even my partner Sun Roxy tried to play a hidden double game by talking secretly with 3 international tycoons to build a silent cartel block against my bidding margins behind my back. But the verdict was announced and the priority extraction license was awarded directly to Dynasty Capital, making Sun Roxy's hand shake in total disbelief because she had spent millions tracking my logistics without knowing I had bypassed the open market and signed a direct industrial support pact with the state. So I smoothly stood up with sovereign majesty to receive the golden mining charter and told Director Sun that tracking my movements is useless and she should have tracked my data architecture instead. With the global market secured, I returned to the old hometown of Yunkin to clear the final personal anchors, locating the old iron box in a decaying courtyard where I kept the cheap gifts I had saved for 3 years to buy for Sujin in my past life. And she watched the box with eyes turning red with burning tears of permanent regret, whispering that she never threw them away but to a Sigma dead assets hold 0 valuation. So I calmly tossed the metal box into the mechanical crusher of a garbage compression truck, pulverizing the last physical link to my old self. As the truck drove away, leaving her weeping against the concrete wall in the grey downpour, marking a complete liberating termination of past karma and officially erasing the old Chainan from the physical world. At 3 in the morning inside my penthouse office, a flurry of red notifications warned of a smear campaign as the remaining hidden forces of the old Capital Alliance tried a final low-level attack, spreading internet rumors of illegal fund collection, believing public opinion could damage a sovereign who holds absolute audited data transparency, while I lit a premium cigar and remained completely unbothered, ordering my team to upload all our audited tax certificates and international compliance files directly to the state servers because I didn't hire public relations teams and used the raw truth as a precision kinetic weapon. And by the next morning, the independent media outlets that fabricated the rumors were completely crushed by multi-million defamation lawsuits. Seeing the rumors fail, Sun Roxy made her final move and entered my office looking sharp and dangerous to enforce a hostile 40% stake takeover using her southern supply chain, threatening that all southern laboratories and component grids would stop functioning tomorrow morning if I didn't comply, showing that the red-haired witch truly believed she held a knife to my throat. So I typed a command revealing a hidden structural data matrix showing that all master algorithm decryption keys were already distributed across servers I had secretly bought in the old factory land, making her face instantly turn green, causing her to pull the contract back with a self-critical defeated laugh and absolute submission, because without my clearance her entire network of labs would turn into a pile of useless scrap tomorrow morning. Meaning the final internal variable was tamed and the framework was ready for global launch, because money can be recovered but time and loyalty are gone forever. The day of the global product launch arrived, marking the definitive boundary line between the old automated past and the new sovereign future. And standing at the center of the illuminated stage, I didn't present a simple software upgrade but initiated the first generation of general artificial intelligence known as the Wangchao Matrix. As the giant panoramic display wall activated with a blinding crimson light wave and the entire auditorium went dead static before erupting into a roar of pure historical shock, while international tech executives stared at the screens with absolute reverence and terrifying awe as the press declared it a technology with a 20-year advantage over the global market, officially writing my name into the core registry of the era. And backstage, Sun Roxy and Monica embraced me with faces full of total undeniable professional loyalty, because the Southern Cartel was completely convinced and surrendered their decision-making rights to my central network forever. 10 years later, the corporate wars became distant gossip inside high society lounges. And I visited an empty grave site in a serene cemetery, standing before an unmarked white headstone holding a bouquet of wild white flowers at the exact location where my past life version was buried in the dark. Gently placing the flowers onto the marble base and whispering to the shadow self that I lived the destiny we deserved and the loops are closed so he can rest in absolute peace now. Then I turned around and saw Sujin wearing a modest gray coat, having resigned from the fund years ago to choose the quiet life of an ordinary primary school teacher, with her face completely purged of her old heiress greed and ice queen arrogance, as her eyes held no more toxic ambition but only the quiet serenity of someone who had finally awakened from an empty superficial dream. She softly greeted me and I nodded back with polite respectful indifference, exchanging a few words like ordinary old acquaintances with no drama and no tears but just absolute closure. And as I walked away down the hill path, we crossed paths like ships in the night, confirming the old obsession was entirely pulverized and my soul was completely free. Then my terminal buzzed, confirming our network value had crossed the $1 trillion line, securing absolute global dominance. So I stopped at a wide stone terrace overlooking the immense sparkling ocean and pulled out the faded original 1 billion check from Su Xianghua that I always kept as a reminder. Slowly ripping the yellow check into tiny shreds and letting the paper pieces dissolve into the strong sea wind, releasing the last fragment of the past code into the void, because this life was lived perfectly. And stepping into a sleek matte black luxury sports car, I knew the architecture is complete and the sovereign doesn't look back at the harbor but drives straight toward the infinite horizon. As the black car disappeared down the beautiful winding coastal highway, meaning the legend of the shadow billionaire is finalized, but the loop of absolute control will run forever. Because money can be recovered but time and loyalty are gone forever, and our game is completely finished. Initiating a system data verification check showing all parameters operating at 100% capacity across global grids. with a digital profile file of Chainan displaying the status as Ultimate Architect secured forever, confirming there are no errors and no vulnerabilities and the network is completely autonomous. While the thrones of the old elite remain empty and converted into foundational code for my global corporation inside the ultra-minimalist executive floor of Dynasty Capital at midnight, where a framed old photo of a younger Chainan in his cheap gray hoodie sits as a reminder of where the code was written and a warning to anyone who mistakes humility for weakness. As the skyscraper tower pierces the cloud layers under the silent night sky, proving the world lives by my metrics now, and every transaction confirms my supremacy. And the digital clock display shifts from 23:59 to midnight, starting a new cycle automatically because the timeline belongs to the architect and the network will never fail. As the loop is eternal and the position is unbreachable, meaning the game is closed. But to truly appreciate the final code of absolute sovereignty, the system must revisit the precise points of origin at the old Yunkin University campus, where a younger Chainan stood outside the library in the freezing rain holding a heavy stack of printed research papers for Sujin, acting like a shield against a world that didn't care about my existence. With hands blue from the cold and trembling while giving my time and intellect and absolute loyalty to a system that calculated my value as 0%. And the past Sujin walked out of the library doors surrounded by wealthy heirs, completely ignoring me to step into Saoi's premium vehicle because to them my effort was a free resource. Leaving the younger Chainan standing alone in the dark as the sports car drove away, splashing muddy water over his shoes, marking the exact moment of absolute humiliation that initiated the architecture of my future loop. But back in the present day, the past data is fully processed and resources have been reallocated with absolute mathematical precision. As I sat in my central obsidian chair with my sharp eyes reflecting the rising metrics of my space communication grid, actively locking down the communication nodes of the southern financial cartels, making Sun Roxy realize that her obsidian alliance was completely useless against a sovereign who operates from the orbital plane. So she entered my command room and threw a signed document of total surrender onto the desk, relinquishing her remaining patent claims without a single word of defiance because the witch had run out of code options. And I calmly pressed the master execution key to accept her compliance and absorb her southern clusters into the central Dynasty network for zero cost. Initiating the next phase for the final liquidation of the international syndicate Goliath Group owned by Brad's family at a grand international economic court hall in New York, where federal judges reviewed a massive platinum-bound digital file containing the entire hidden offshore ledger of the cartel compiled by my quantum AI kernel, leaving their legal shield completely broken. As the corrupt investor Brad sat in the defense box looking gray and emaciated from fear, facing the brink of a 30-year international isolation sentence. And the chief judge slammed his massive wooden gavel, declaring the immediate seizure of all Goliath Group global assets and transferring the entire infrastructure to my brand. So I spoke through the courtroom speakers like a clinical execution order, stating that all their international clearing houses now belong to Vendetta Capitals and his family has exactly 10 seconds to exit the market, causing Brad to collapse onto his desk, gripping his hair as federal marshals escorted him to the isolation cell, erasing him from the financial grid forever as another parasite deleted from the architecture. With the cleanup of the international sector finalized, making Dynasty Capitals the absolute apex predator of venture capital. And Monica presented a golden keycard containing the data links to the new unified global asset pool, reporting that our total consolidated capital had entered a planetary scale of autonomy. As I looked against the setting sun with an expression that is an absolute unbreachable stone wall of Sigma superiority, knowing the old clerk who survived on instant noodles was gone and the overlord of capital was officially crowned. Meanwhile, at the absolute bottom of the social matrix in a dirty, cramped alleyway, the former senior partner Richard was facing his final margin call, begging a local street lender for a few coins in his torn mud-covered suit because the thief who stole my analytical reports for 2 years was now unable to pay for a simple night in a third-tier shelter. And as he looked up and saw a giant LED billboard broadcasting my global summit speech, he was forced to witness my absolute triumph from the gutters of society, dropping to his knees in a muddy puddle and shaking with violent sobs because the ultimate punishment is the unyielding knowledge that you yourself destroyed your own connection to a genius ruler. While my quantum AI core completed the total integration of all absorbed resources inside the pristine main server vault, locking the loop forever. Meaning the 9th phase of the master plan struck its perfect target as our game is reaching its zenith, because money can be recovered but time and loyalty are gone forever. The final phase of the master loop requires the absolute public submission of the remaining global banking syndicates. So I stepped out of an armored limousine at the Global Economy Summit, arriving not to pitch a project but to enforce the compliance laws of my new digital framework. And as I walked down the grand marble hall, the same billionaires who once signed my international exclusion orders stood like submissive pupils, bowing deeply and hoping for a second of my attention. But a Sigma doesn't trade favors with the old regime, because my system had already prepared their final transaction ledger. And the moment I reached the central glass desk, the colossal amphitheater went dead static as the weight of my capital paralyzed 5,000 financial leaders into absolute silence. So instead of presenting spreadsheets, I simply displayed the automated liquidation scripts that my quantum core was executing in real time on the giant digital matrix screen behind me, showing holographic data flows highlighting the dark red debt lines connecting 30 major Western central banks to my server, as the zero-day loop protocol had already absorbed their primary liquidity reserves. causing an elderly European banking chairman to drop his platinum pen as his face turned ash gray when his monitor flashed liquidation complete, meaning their multi-billion clearing houses ceased to exist within 3 minutes of my silence on stage. While I stood perfectly motionless looking down at the panicked elites with total clinical superiority, because true power is the absolute unquestionable finality of your mathematical algorithms. Making 20 major tech moguls simultaneously bow their heads to the desk, realizing their complete corporate bankruptcy as the old financial system officially capitulated and the entire planetary liquidity grid was locked under my central brand. Meanwhile, across the ocean in a pathetic gray slum, the proud ice queen Sujin was finishing her 15-hour washing shift in a greasy restaurant kitchen for a few pennies. As the former mistress of multi-billion funds now counted scraps of paper money just to pay the landlord for a cold, decaying room with sweat and grease covering her pale face. And staring at a small, cracked old smartphone broadcasting the global summit live stream, she realized she could never escape my shadow. Seeing my sharp profile with the bold headline naming me the uncontested overlord of wealth making her tears mix with the greasy water as she remembered how easily her family threw my life into the trash shredder. With her eyes filling with a terminal permanent agony of absolute regret, knowing arrogance fed her ego for a single day but stripped her of a glorious future with a sovereign for the rest of her existence. And collapsing onto the dirty concrete floor, she shook with dry violent sobs, because the prison of knowing you yourself threw away a multi-billion devotion is an eternal hell. Back at the summit, I turned my back on the global podium without waiting for applause, because my data architecture had proven its flawless absolute rightness across all metrics. And behind the closed doors of the summit, the integration of the final planetary infrastructure nodes reached 100% capacity inside an ultra-minimalist high-security executive suite. As Monica presented the Platinum Ledger of Global Compliance confirming that all independent financial factions were officially deleted or absorbed into our master grid. So I signed the final decree with a single quick and razor-sharp strike of my silver pen, cold-bloodedly finalizing the last point in this massive multi-year multi-layered game. The next morning the sky over the global financial core was perfectly clear and sharp, signaling that the old system was completely dismantled and the new economic era was officially operational. As thousands of advanced quantum servers worked in silent perfect harmony inside the main operational hall of Guangzhou Capitals, proving our empire no longer depended on national regulators or external courts. Because we became the regulation itself and the universal operating system by which this planet allocates its liquidity. While a former corrupt executive who once helped Saui now sat alone on a public bench in rags, proving the thieves and parasites who tried to exploit my loyalty had all dissolved into complete anonymity. And the system cleaned itself automatically, ensuring every individual received exactly what they calculated by their choices, as all rival networks were permanently deleted. Meaning the quality of your destiny is always determined by the quality of your calculation during the moment of betrayal. As I dined with Monica under the cold stars guarded by elite enforcers, and holding a crystal glass of pure water reflecting the endless sea of neon city lights, I knew my cold clinical detachment protected me from the cheap emotions that burned the empires of my enemies into ash. While Sujin walked under a heavy downpour down a dirty backstreet, completely transformed into a faceless ghost of the past and a broken silent witness to a triumph that should have been hers. Stepping into a muddy puddle and shattering her own crying reflection as her timeline froze on the day she chose her father's arrogance, while mine moved with the speed of quantum data generating trillions. And the artificial intelligence matrix reached a planetary level of self-optimization, completely eliminating any human error risks inside the colossal quantum mainframes. Flashing a line of glowing green code confirming the architecture of the new world was finalized and all global operations were functioning with absolute mathematical precision. Leaving beside the sovereign only the elite nodes who proved their value through raw performance and not fake contracts, like Monica standing near my chair with an expression of total professional loyalty. So I stood up and walked out onto the wide panoramic terrace, knowing 2 years of slavery in a gray hoodie and 99 public rejections were fully compensated by my ultimate triumph. With the memory of the days when they treated me like a broke parasite, making my core completely immune to any future external strikes. And our scale no longer possessed any physical or legal boundaries, making our expansion absolute and cosmic as a massive black superyacht slowly departed into the dark ocean. Allowing me to stand on the open flight deck looking at the infinite line where the dark ocean met the clear night sky full of stars, and knowing the system was perfect. Because every cent they stole from my projects in the past returned to my network in the form of total uncontested sovereignty over this market. As we constructed a multi-trillion monolith on the graves of those who considered a shadow genius a temporary asset. While Sujin rode a freezing public transit bus towards her empty suburban barracks, permanently deleted from the registry of the global elite. Becoming a permanent monument to her own stupidity as an entity without a future or status or a single shred of hope, while looking at the distant glowing red logo of Guangzhou Capital. And looking out at the endless deep ocean horizon, I knew the finale of this massive multi-year game was predestined on the exact day they ripped my employee badge from my neck. Because a Sigma doesn't waste energy on revenge driven by cheap emotions, but simply enforces perfect mathematical order in the system with eyes filled only with the cold light of complete victory. So I turned around and walked back into the secure luxury cabin, knowing the loop of vengeance is fully closed and will never loosen on their necks for the rest of their existence. As the AI kernel locked the permanent stable status of the overlord across all operational networks of the Earth, working in absolute silence. And the 30-day cycle concluded hitting the absolute zero mark, meaning every second of my new existence now works exclusively to multiply the metrics of my global uncontested dominance. Making this planet live by my laws and breathe in strict accordance with my financial and technological directives under the red neon glows of sovereign technology. Permanently burying the era of fake elites and ungrateful bosses and toxic investors at the absolute bottom of the master ledger. Because we extracted this global crown by the supreme right of calculation and strategic intelligence and the unyielding pragmatism of a Sigma. So your 30-day cycle has reached its absolute zero old system and the loop has tightened on your necks for eternity. Money can be recovered but time and loyalty are gone forever, meaning our master game is completely and perfectly finished.